Whether you've heard it on Idina Menzel's holiday album or anywhere else, Ocho Kandelikas is an international classic. But a classic written not that long ago. For although it was written in Ladino, a language sparsely spoken today, it is the work of Flory Jagoda. The story of Flory begins in the early 20th century and features a bit of a bumpy ride until Flory comes to compose Ocho Kandelikas. Born in 1923 in Sarajevo, Bosnia, Flory's parents separated after just 1 year of marriage. Rosa, Flory's mother, then moved with her daughter back to Vlasenica, a mountain village in northeast Bosnia, where her family had been living for generations. And so, Flory grew up with her extended family on her mother's side, the Alteracs. Actually, Alterac is the Bosnian version of Alteres, a Spanish name which can be translated as old kind, or by inference, an old family, and Flory's family took pride in this Spanish connection. Growing up, Flory learned about her family's departure from Spain as a result of the Edict of Expulsion issued by Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand in January 1492. Eventually, Flory's ancestors settled in Sarajevo. As a child, Flory was swept into the family pride as she learned of the legend of La Llave, or the key, which each Sephardi family carried with them from Spain. This figurative key held with it the hopes that one day they'd be able to return to their homes. This legend was turned into one of Flory's most important songs, La Yave De Espanya. Written in Judeo-Espanol, or Ladino, this song proves that whether the actual keys were literally handed down is irrelevant, for the songs and the language were certainly passed down from generation to generation. Back in Vlasenica, Flory's family was known as the Singing Alteracs. Various members of the family were invited to perform at festivals as their musical talents were exquisite. But it was Flory's grandmother, her nonna, who possibly had the most impact on Flory. She was a talented singer who lived by a motto Flory would adopt: Si no puedes meter la alma, no cantes. If you can't put your soul into your songs, don't bother singing. Her nonna was also the community midwife, and when she was called up to a birthing, the first thing she gathered up was her panderico, or her tambourine. And she had a strong connection to Sephardic custom and religious practice. You see, Flory's nonna taught the women in the family the proper prayers and benedictions. She would remain a special part of Flory's life even after Rosa remarried and the family of 3 moved to Zagreb when Flory was 11. Flory would visit Vlasenica in the summers and enjoy her nonna's cooking, of course, but also the singing and speaking in Judeo, or Judeo-Spanish of Bosnia. This isn't to say she left her music in Vlasenica. Michael, Flory's stepfather, to whom she referred to as her father, bought her an accordion, which in the Croatian language is called a harmoniku, and she excitedly began to play it. The harmoniku would actually save her later on during World War II. For you see, when the war came to Bosnia, things began to change. The Nazis and their allies in the Balkans, especially the ultra-nationalist Ustaše, brought the Holocaust to the region. Only 17% of the more than 82,000 Jews living in Yugoslavia survived. Flory and her parents were among them. But while the Alteracs were quite established in the mountain village, Flory's grandfather and great-uncle even served on the town council in Vlasenica. When it came to the war, their status changed. The Alteracs lived peacefully with their neighbors, whether they were Muslim, Greek Orthodox, or otherwise, until 1941, when the Nazis marched into Zagreb. In 1942, the 60 Jews living in Vlasenica, including 42 family members of Flory's, were rounded up by the Nazi-aligned Ustaše, murdered, and thrown into a mass grave. But Flory would find this out only 40 years later. During the war, she survived with the help of false papers her stepfather had secured. Flory was sent alone on a train to Split, a city on the Croatian coast, which by agreement with the Germans was under Italian control. Her father instructed her not to speak, but just to play her harmoniku throughout the trip. And she did for all 4 hours. The passengers and conductor were so delighted they didn't even ask for her papers. Not much later, Flory's parents joined her in Split, and from there they were sent to Korčula, an Italian protectorate island at the time. They lived on the island in relative peace for 2 years until the Italians capitulated the Allies in September of 1943. At that point, the Nazis exerted control in Croatia and other areas the Italians occupied, posing a threat to the Jews on the island of Korčula. Flory and her parents managed to escape by boat from the island to Bari and lived there until Flory eventually fell in love with an American soldier, Sergeant Harry Jagoda, who was stationed in Italy. He also happened to be Jewish, Shel Beit Ashkenazi. The two married in 1945, with Flory wearing a dress made of a silk parachute and Harry's entire company in attendance. When Harry was discharged from the army, he returned to the United States. Flory came later traveling on a ship that carried some 300 war brides from Italy to the United States, and her harmonicou was right there with her. Soon enough, she had 4 children, and she raised them to be fully American, speaking only English and practicing Ashkenazi customs and traditions. Flory's mother, Rosa, was fully in favor of this upbringing, for when she came to the U.S., Rosa had wanted to suppress all they had left behind. To her, it was erased by the terror of World War II. It wasn't until Rosa passed away that Flory returned to some of the pre-war memories and to her Sephardic heritage. She looked through old photographs and began to write down songs and stories she remembered. That was when she returned to her Judeo-Spanish as well. Flory revived and arranged songs she remembered her Nona singing. But she also began composing new songs, many of which became part of the Sephardic song repertoire, like Ocho Kandelikas, which was the first song she wrote. She taught her children these songs, and most of them would perform them with her. And then, Flory's musical career began to flourish, even though she had performed locally even before. Now, she was being invited to sing internationally the songs that, as she said, celebrated Sephardic communities that were almost totally destroyed in what she called the madness of World War II. Flory's reconnection with the music was also a reconnection with Judeo-Spanish and its speakers today. She saw the language as living and breathing despite the trials it endured through the Inquisition and subsequent expulsion, as well as the Holocaust. And she loved to share it with others by teaching it to anyone who showed interest. She did this mainly through teachings and songs, and by performing anywhere she was asked to perform. This was her version of passing the key from generation to generation. Flory had been honored, interviewed, written about, and recorded many times over. On January 29th, 2021, she passed away, but her music and spirit live on through her teachings, her recordings, and many concerts in a career that spanned some 4 decades. For Flory Jagoda wasn't just a musician, she was everyone's Nona.
Komo Muestro Dyo, Komo Muestro Señor, Komo Muestro Rey, Komo Muestro San.